Congratulations on making it to the end of section 2 of the Complete iOS 10 developer course. Hopefully you now feel reasonably familiar with the Xcode interface and are happy with adding some user interface elements and writing a little bit of Swift code to make those elements interactive. In this last video, we're going to be making our first vaguely useful app, which is cat years. So let's have a look at it in action. It's pretty simple. Firstly, we've got a nice picture of a cat at the bottom, and then the user is invited to enter the age of their cat in years. So let's say my cat is 2, and then the app will multiply that by 7, which is considered, I believe, to be the standard way of working out how old your cat is in cat years, and give you the result 14. Let's just check it. If you've got an 8-year-old cat, your cat will be 56 in cat years. So now this looks pretty simple, but there's actually quite a lot of reasonably complicated Swift behind this. So what I'd suggest is you give it a go and attempt to recreate an app which does this yourself. So you shouldn't have any problem creating the user interface, and you should be able to develop a little bit of interaction between the user and the app. But my guess is you'll run into a few small problems when you try to do the multiplying by 7 part. So if you're feeling confident, or if you've done a bit of Swift development before, you might want to just have a Google and see if you can solve those problems yourself. But if not, don't worry, it's early stages in the course, and you're very, very welcome to watch how I go through and solve those problems. Either way, it should be a fun learning experience. And now I'll give you an opportunity to pause the video and get as far as you can on the app cat years. All right, so well done if you managed to make a go of that. As I say, don't worry at all if you didn't get it completed. My intention was very much for you to give it a shot and then see how it's done. So let's start by bringing in a label. And I'm going to align it up the top there, and this is going to be the name of our app. And because it's the flagship app in this section, I'm going to just do a very minimal amount of styling. So notice that's a system font by default. We need to change that to custom to be able to change the font family. I think it was custom by default last time. I enjoy a bit of Papyrus. So let's make it a little bit bigger. And just for fun, oh no, that's pretty bad, we'll have a sort of reddy orangey color. Okay. Now we'll have another label underneath the title, which asks, how old is your cat? Then we'll bring in our text field to allow the user to enter the age. And we want this to be a number, so I'm going to change the keyboard type to number pad. And next we'll have our button, which allows the user to submit. There we go. And then we're going to have another label, which is where we'll tell the user the name or the age of their cat in cat years. So we'll just have in cat years, your cat is, and we'll just center that, and then a final label to contain the number itself. And this one will make a little bit bigger. So it's likely to be a 2-digit number, but it might be a 3-digit number. So let's make it big enough to contain that. There we go. And let's give it a bit of color as well. Not blue, because that clashes with the button. That green's a bit horrible. Slightly darker green. There we go. That'll do. Okay, so let's just make sure everything is nice and centered. There we go. And to pretty it up a little bit, we're going to put a cat in here as well. So let's go back to Wikipedia and search for cat. And hopefully that'll give us a nice picture of a cat that we can use. Here we go. Let's go for that one. Or in fact, that's a number of images of cats. So as this image contains a lot of images of cats, it gives me an opportunity to show you a very useful feature of the Mac, which is you can do screenshots very easily. And I'm going to use a screenshot to separate out that cat there, which is the one I'm going to use in my app. So to do a screenshot, you just use Command-Shift-4 and then drag the bit of the screen that you want to capture. Very, very simple. Done. And then that will be saved as a file, likely on your desktop. So go back over to Finder, and there it is. I'm just going to rename that to something a bit more simple. So press Enter and then cat. There we go. Very simple. Obviously, you can use any cat image you like, but do be careful of licensing issues. If you're just using it as a personal project, it really doesn't matter. But if it's ever going to be made public, then you need to make sure that you have the rights to use that particular image. So back over to Xcode, back over to Finder, and then drag in the cat image. Use the default options as before. And then we're going to create an image view. Drag that in, make it nice and centered. Drag it all the way to the bottom and then just recenter again, like so. Select cat.png from the image. There we go, it looks good already, but let's just change it to aspect fit. Actually, it was pretty close already. Excellent. All right, so now our app looks good. Actually, I might just make our cat a little bit smaller so we've got a bit more room to see the number. All right, so now the tricky bit, we need to make it so that the app works out the number of cat years, which is the number of human years multiplied by 7. So the first bit should be fairly straightforward. We're going to bring in the assistant editor, get rid of the left and right menus that we don't need, and then create some IB outlets for the important parts of our app. So let's start with the text field. So I'm going to call that age text field. Very simple. And then I'll create one for the label. I'll call that age label. And then finally, we'll create an IB action for the submit button. And the action is submit pressed. And so let's connect that. All right, at this point, I often like to do just a little test before I write my quite complicated code to get the number of cat years. what I'm going to do is just print whatever the user has entered into the age text field. So age text field dot text. There we go. So that just will make me convinced that I've linked everything up correctly, and if I do get an error, then at least it's not an error because I've forgotten to create an IB outlet for one of my UI elements. So I'd recommend doing that as well. Whenever you've created a layout for your app, once you've created all of the IB outlets and IB actions, just check very simply that they're all connected up before writing any complex code. So let's enter a number in the age text field. So for now, 21, and then submit, and we should see, there we go, 21 down there. Now notice that 21 is something called an optional. We'll be seeing lots more about optionals in the next section, but for now, all you need to know about optionals is that they are variables that don't necessarily have values. So the age text field .text doesn't necessarily have a value. So that's why it's considered an optional. And in most cases, we need to treat optionals a little bit specially, and we'll see one way that we do that in a moment. All right, but anyway, everything is connected up as we would hope. So now I want to work out the age in cat years, which simply takes the user's age that they've entered, multiply it by 7, and then displays it here in age label. But that's not quite as simple as you might think. Let's see why. Well, if we take the age that they've entered, which is age text field dot text, what we want to do is multiply that by 7. And in Swift, to multiply two numbers together, you use an asterisk, just like most programming languages. So this means age text field dot text multiplied by 7. However, you can see that Xcode has given us an error here. Let's have a look and see what the error is. Error is binary operator star or asterisk cannot be applied to the operands of type string and int. Now that might not make a great deal of sense, but what it's saying is that this agefield.text is a string. It contains characters that the user has entered there. And this, number 7, is an integer or a whole number. And we can't multiply strings and integers together because a string might be a name, for example, and it doesn't make any sense to do Rob multiplied by 7. So what we have to do is we have to convert our string into an integer, into an int, a whole number. And we do that using the command int with a capital I. And then we put brackets round age for text field dot text. And this will convert age text field dot text, which is a string, into a whole number integer. And this is something we're going to have to do quite a lot of because Swift is what's known as a typed language, which means it's quite fussy about the different types of variables within it. And if you try, for example, to multiply a string and a number together, it simply won't let you do it. So you have to convert the variables to the correct type to be able to use them. Now we're still getting an error here, and this is because of the optional issue that I mentioned earlier. Now Xcode allows you to automatically fix that by putting an exclamation mark in here. And what the exclamation mark does there is what's known as unwrapping this value here. So as we mentioned, it's possible that age textfield.text doesn't have a value. And if so, converting it to an integer would cause an error. So what we're doing by putting this exclamation mark at the end here is saying to Xcode, nope, don't worry, I know for sure that age textfield.text has a value, and so it's okay to use it. Now, at this early stage in our programming career, this is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But later on, we're going to find out better ways of dealing with optionals because there is a chance that we're wrong here and it doesn't have a value, and in which case unwrapping it is going to cause an error. So this is fine for now, but we'll come back to it and see better ways to deal with optionals in the next section. For now though, we can take our integer and multiply it by 7, like that. And now we don't have an error except for the error that we haven't used it yet, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do here is create a variable called age in cat years. You can see the camel case that I've used there. So all lowercase apart from the beginning of the second, third, and fourth words. And I'm going to set that equal to the integer of age text field.text multiplied by 7. Now you notice another error has popped up, and that's because we have another optional in there. Now can you see where the optional would be? It's where the text field text is converted to an integer. Because again, the text field text might be Rob. They might have typed in a word there for some strange reason, or they might have typed FOUR because they didn't realize that they had to put in a number. And if that happened, then we'd get an error here. So what we're going to do is say to Xcode again that we're really sure that we'll be able to convert this text to an integer. And again, this is a little bit naughty, and it will definitely cause our app to crash if the user enters, say, a word in this box here, or indeed if they enter nothing. So remember this as an example which will work, but is not great practice, and we'll see much better ways to deal with user submitted text in the next and future sections. If all goes well though, we have got the age in cat years. So all we need to do is update this label to have that value. So we're going to take age label dot text, and what we'd like to do is just set that equal to age in cat years. But you might be able to anticipate what error we're going to get when we try and do that. It's a very similar error to what we had before, and that is that this is a string and this is an integer. So we're trying to set something which is a string into the value of something which is not a string. And Swift does not like us doing that at all. So we can convert this back into a string in the same way that we turned it into an integer just by using string and then brackets age in cat years. Notice that we don't need an exclamation mark at the end here because we're always going to be able to convert an integer into a string. That's always possible. It's only the other way around that we might have problems. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground there. There's one warning, as you can see here, it's worth paying attention to there. And this is something that we'll see a few times as well. That there are two ways that we can define a variable in Swift. One is var, and the other is let. And let is used when we never change the value of a variable. And that's the case here. And Swift prefers us to use let unless we actively change the value of the variable at some point further on down the line. And as we're not doing that here, we're just going to use let. So it will work fine with var, but you will get a warning, and it's better to use let where possible. All right, so I hope you managed to follow most of that example. As I said at the beginning, it wasn't as straightforward as perhaps you thought it was going to be, and it's given you hopefully a little bit of insight into some of the complications that we get when we try and do something even reasonably simple like this in Swift. Don't worry if you're not entirely clear on what an optional is or what we're doing when we use the exclamation mark there. We'll be covering that very specifically in the next section. All right though, let's have a look and see if our cat years app works. And here we go. So I'm going to click in the text field and I'll enter the age of 3 and then tap submit, and we get the age 21. 3 times 7, correct. Let's just try another one. 9, submit, 63. Perfect. And what happens if I try and submit before I've entered an age? What do you think will happen? if we tap submit, we get a fatal error. Unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value. And horrible things happen. The whole simulator crashes and everything goes down here and we get error messages everywhere. It's really not nice. So you don't want that to happen. And as I say, we'll find ways of avoiding that particular crash later on in the course. One final thing I'd like to change is just to remove that 621 at the beginning there. So we'll just leave it blank for now. All right, so congratulations on making it to the end of section 2. You should now hopefully feel reasonably familiar with the Xcode interface, with the left and right panes and the central pane, which you can divide into two using the assistant editor if you want to. And you also now know how to add labels, text fields, buttons, more labels, and images into your apps. And more than that, you know how to use some Swift code and working with Xcode to make your apps interactive and give the user a response, in this case, an even reasonably useful response when they enter some information. So that's a huge step forward from where you were, hopefully just an hour or so ago. In the next section, we're now going to spend a bit of time becoming very familiar with Swift and to learn how to program with it and how we can use it to make far more powerful apps than our cat years one that we've created just now. I hope you're ready to learn some more Swift, and I'll see you at the beginning of section 3.